members of the public to understand the complex legislation that we have to go through here. And I was just thinking, I was just banging the table like, hello, jury duty, hello, jury duty, hello. And so I actually ended up arguing for it, even though I had a couple of reservations. But I said, because of the way that she was so condescending.
Yeah, well, I mean, the same could be said for newly elected MSPs anyway. I mean, surely people want MSPs elected to come from ordinary, inverted commas, backgrounds, which, to be representative of the country. And in actual fact, one of the things that came out of the People's Gathering stuff as well, from people who worked in the Parliament, not as elected politicians, was that they thought that all the MSPs, in fact, could be doing with more training and education in terms of how to scrutinise legislation, etc., etc. So there wouldn't be anything to stop MSPs and members of the Citizens' Assembly alike being supported and having some kind of education and information being supported through that process to be confident in doing what they were doing. Because I've seen it, certainly. Some people go into debates in the Parliament. In fact, most of them probably. There will be people who are assigned to speak who will have a pretty good grasp of the detail of whatever the debate is. Everybody else is in there doing what the whip has told them to do and has not got a clue what the issues are. And certainly not any more than on a superficial basis.
Yeah, I don't like the assumption that MPs and MSPs automatically are more intelligent than members of the public.
Definitely. They certainly are not, I can assure you.
You've had first-hand experience.
And they should be more representative of everybody across the board. There are still too many, particularly in Westminster, but to a certain extent in the Scottish Parliament as well, too many lawyers and too many professional classes.
Well, one thing we could do to improve Scottish democracy immediately is introduce a right of recall. I suppose obviously the outcome of the trial is pending, but the Bill Walker trial provides, I think, quite a strong illustration of how important it is for people to be able to sack their elected representatives if their elected representatives do not perform the tasks they're elected to perform to an adequate standard. Eric Joyce is another example of that, and that's not something we have to wait for independence for or for a republic for. It's something that has been discussed at Westminster, and I was under the impression actually it was going to be introduced at some stage, but it should certainly be introduced in Scotland sooner rather than later, though of course Westminster, I believe, reserves the right to change elections through the Scottish Parliament and the way the Scottish Parliament is elected. It doesn't reserve the right to change the way the local government is elected.
Yeah. The thing about a recall is that was discussed at the People's Gathering as well in other areas, and I'm not totally convinced about how it would work. Where it has happened before, like California, for example, I think there are some issues with it in terms of a wee bit like judges and security of tenure, the whole debate around that and people actually being principled and autonomous rather than trying to please the voters and always, concentrating on their media profile, positive spin, rather than getting on with the job and acting out a principle. So I think the Eric Joyce example means that you would not you couldn't deny that there should be some mechanism to have them chucked out, but I think it needs a wee bit more discussion and debate about how that would happen without compromising kind of a wee bit, the independence and autonomy that people are wanting to see as expressed through their desire for a citizens' assembly. They're wanting people to be a wee bit stronger and more autonomous rather than doing what their parties tell them.
And maybe a case then of just ensuring that elected representatives who are convicted of crimes, particularly violent crimes, automatically lose their seats. But I'm sure there are some significant challenges with the idea of right to recall.
Can I just throw in while we're on the subject of referendums and constitutional change, this is actually a listener-submitted question. Someone asked if we could talk about this, so I thought it was a good point to bring up. We've all said we'd like to see a referendum on the monarchy. Would you like to see a referendum on the currency? I said yes, but a lot of people that I was speaking to said they think it's a different issue and it's a different idea. We'll go to Jamie first.
Well, I'd like to see a more robust and better informed debate about the currency. And I'd like the SNP's position on the currency to be challenged more comprehensively. I'm not one to buy into the idea of capital flight and into the idea that if you change your economic and constitutional structures, then you're going to send the markets into some terrible spin and all potential investors are going to be scared away. However, given the extent to which I can imagine radical constitutional change of the sort which is on offer now in the form of independence, frightening off investors, coupled with a potential change in the currency in the short term, coupled with a referendum on the currency, and I think that sounds to me like a pretty sort of dangerous recipe.
Carolyn, would you like to see a referendum on the currency?
Do you know, I think you could have a menu of referendum and all these different things. I think it would be helpful to avoid these various calls for different referenda on all the things the SNP say are going to stay the same. If the SNP could just be very explicit that that's their policy and that there would be opportunities to vote for parties or, whatever, in an independent Scotland that might have a different view about the currency. I wouldn't like to see referendums, a referendum one after the other on every single thing that the SNP's put forward as its vision for an independent Scotland. I think that would be cumbersome. But I do think there needs to be a bigger debate about the currency, and I think, it's where we run into fun. Me individually, obviously not speaking for Women For Independence or anybody else, but it's where I would run. I swear I would run into fundamental disagreements about the need to satisfy the markets. I mean, as if the markets have been successful so far in getting us into the state that we're in, the banking crisis and all the rest of it. There are different ways of doing things. So I would inform my attitude towards a currency around the idea of not frightening the horses. I would personally like to see something very fundamentally different, and I would like to see more debate about that too.
I suppose if we were going to have a referendum on the currency, then why would we not have a referendum on Trident or on any number of other policies that will fundamentally change Scotland and shape Scotland's political future?
I'm quite sympathetic to the idea of multiple referendums, actually. I mean, you could have a form of government where even the five biggest issues, it's all done in one referendum. But although sometimes they're not very straight yes or no issues, but
how do you decide what the five biggest issues are?
Interesting question. That's got to be decided in the Parliament, I suppose.
But probably you'd need to do it by deciding on poll. And I think, as everything is, it's complicated. If you look at the referenda on the European Constitution, for example, and France's vote was absolutely nothing to do with the European Constitution. It was to do with the political climate in France at the time. And, it can be used to give an incumbent government a bloody nose. And so I think it's complicated, especially when you're talking about big issues. I think the whole of your democracy needs to be revamped and reviewed. So from my perspective, in terms of being more participative, people feeling as if they've got more invested in it, people thinking they have got power and influence, so that if you were using referenda, they actually would be about the particular subject rather than them being about giving the incumbent government a bloody nose because they weren't doing what they said they were going to do when people voted for them or whatever. Do you know?
Yeah, it's a good point. Just to move on to our last topic, Jamie, you had an article out this week that got quite a lot of attention. Can you just explain what it was about a bit?
Well, I was just making the point that although a no vote is still the most likely outcome at this stage, unionism is gutting itself intellectually in its failure or refusal, I don't know which, to be able to produce any compelling or progressive case for the UK. The consequence of that is that if there is a no vote, you can't guarantee into the future, how long the nationalists will be held off. If there's no meaningful, positive account of Scotland's future as part of the United Kingdom, then Scots will very quickly, especially after a narrow no vote, come to the conclusion, I think, that greater devolution really will require independence.
And I think it's a very interesting idea because part of me wants to say, how long can the nationalists be held off? The fact that they're campaigning in the way they are is making independence inevitable, but another part of me worries that The way that their campaign has gone is souring not just the debate about the independence referendum, but it's souring all the relations within the United Kingdom. Carolyn, what do you think about it?
I agree with what Jamie's analysis of the No campaign. It isn't offering any kind of positive vision. It's not offering any hope. It's not offering any concessions at all. And they're obviously even running scared from actual debate. Their whole strategy seems to be to stifle debate and stifle democracy. And I think the genie's out of the bottle, because the referendum has already sparked these various things, Women for Independence, Labour For Indy, the People's Gathering, things that are broader, the STUC's paper, the Commonweal, radical independence, the whole lot of things that are reinvigorating democratic debate, probably still at an activist level. But people are talking more about politics. And so the democratic genie, I think, is out of the bottle. And so I think any campaign that attempts to win on the basis of pissing people off and stifling discussion, stifling any debate and being entirely cynical about the prospects for democracy, I think is ill-fated. And I think with the momentum and as more and more people discuss, I do think the gap in the polls can be bridged. And I think if there's a no vote, it's a process anyway. And unless there was some move to increase devolution in powers or whatever afterwards, people would very quickly become disaffected because they would realise what the consequences were of a no vote. Even if they don't realise it before a no vote, soon after, the consequences of a no vote will be apparent to everybody. And so I don't see the referendum as an event. I see it as a process anyway. And I would agree with Jamie that I do think that independence is inevitable at some stage, hopefully next year, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Jamie, if it turns out a no vote, when do you think maybe the next time it would come up would be?
Well, Salmond himself has said that it would be a once-in-a-generation sort of a vote, and I think that's probably true. I think the margin of defeat matters a lot. So if the Yes campaign fails to get more than 40% of the vote, I think it will have been pretty comprehensively defeated. If it gets more than 40% but less than 45%, it's a respectable defeat. If it gets more than 45%, Unionists will never again be able to claim that independence is just a minority pursuit, and it will be a serious shock to the British political system. And 2016 Holyrood elections will become a sort of bidding war between the SNP and the Unionist parties over enhanced power. And that's a war the SNP are bound to win. So, I don't know exactly how long it would take for there to be another vote on independence, but the momentum would remain the same, and the momentum would be towards greater Scottish autonomy. And the question that Unionists have never really answered is, if devolution is a process and not an event, then where on earth does it end? It seems fairly obvious to me that it ends with independence.
Well, let's hope so, and I think that's a good point to finish up for today. But just before we do, I'd like to make a little announcement, because I'd like to put a third podcast on this channel, which is basically a 60-second idea for a better Scotland. What I'd like you to do, the listeners, and anyone you think would be interested in doing it, is to just record yourself on your iPhone, on your computer, whatever, one thing that you think will be done better, could be done better, should be done better, and how to do it in an independent Scotland. Just it doesn't have to be 60 seconds, just keep it brief and send it to me. The contact details will be on the page where you found this podcast. So please get in touch and send those along, and then we'll just publish them as we go, as we get them. Don't worry about editing it up or anything like that. I'll do it for you, and then we'll put them out, and hopefully we'll get some good new ideas in there that people wouldn't have thought of. So just remains to say thanks to Carolyn and Jamie. I hope you two will submit some good ideas as well.
Thank you very much. It was good talking to you both.
Yeah,
it was good fun.
That's us for this week. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Everybody ought to stand.